There we are. Good morning. Happy Thursday, June 18th. Welcome to Breaking Through the Disruption webinar series from RE Journals, which is Minnesota Real Estate Journal in this case. Thank you to our sponsors, SIOR, CCIM, and Monroe Moxness-Berg. We couldn't do webinars without sponsors. We had to pivot from live events to doing webinars, and it was an endeavor, and we couldn't have pulled it off without great sponsors. So deep thanks to y'all for helping us do this. This is us, RE Journals. In case you didn't know, it's a bigger group now than Minnesota Real Estate Journal was a few years ago. We have Red News in Texas. We have Illinois Real Estate Journal, Midwest Real Estate News, and a few other publications. We're 6 publications, 17 states, 104 live events. We're growing and growing. This event is a CE event. Let me hang on a second. I got to get myself out of the way. So I have to read these disclaimers. This webinar has been approved by the Minnesota Commissioner of Commerce for 1 hour of real estate continuing education. This first question on the slide says, how do we track attendance? This is important. So if you're here for CE and this is your first time joining us for CE, most of you know exactly what to do. I see you're in the chat room already. Go in the chat room, put in your name. You don't have to put your number there, but it sure helps, okay? So if you want to put your name and your number in there, but we have to track that you're here. When you logged in, it tracked it, but I like the belt and suspenders approach. Put your name in that chat room. I'm going to come in 2 times and ask a CE question to make sure that you're paying attention and not multitasking. So when I come in and ask a question like, what color is the sky today? It won't be that simple, but go in that chat room, type in your answer, and then Katie, our event planner, will go in and make sure that each person answered both questions, logged in and logged out. So that's important to get your CE credit, especially since it's June 18th and the deadline's coming up. Okay, if you have connection issues, I'm showing on our dedicated server that we have 5 bars. So in this case, it's probably you and not me. There's a button at the top that says reconnect. So if you see any of our speakers glitch or freeze up, or you hear their sound is funny, click that button. It's really quick and it solves 99% of your problems. If that doesn't work, log out, log back in, close your browser, open it up. If that doesn't work, make sure Google Chrome on a PC, or you can watch on your phone or your iPad. If you're on an Apple iPhone, use Safari. If you're on an Android, use Chrome on your Android. That should solve all your issues. If it doesn't, don't call me. Kidding. Okay, chat room you found. It's on your right or below if you're on a phone. If you miss this or any part of this, or you get kicked off, or you want to send it to a friend, we have a YouTube channel. If you do go to our YouTube channel, make sure you follow us, because I have a bet with my kids that we can get to 500, and we're not even close right now. So I'd appreciate that help. rejournals.com video replay will take you to all of our past events, and this event will be there by this afternoon. So today I'm going to get out of the way. Current issues and trends affecting the restaurant community. This is going to be a great webinar, folks. We were talking before we got on, and there's tons of things I even want to know. Hang on. I'm going to turn it over to Matt Duffy and Patricia Weller. They are super smart people who are going to ask questions of our other 2 panelists about the restaurant industry. So you're in for a real treat. I'm going to step out of the way, and thank you, Matt and Patricia. Take it away.
Thank you, Todd. My name is Matt Duffy. I am a shareholder at Monroe Moxness-Berg, and I'm with Pat Weller, who's also a shareholder at Monroe Moxness-Berg. With us today is Brian Ingram. He's a local restaurateur here in Minnesota. He's developed several concepts. Most notably our cargo in Minneapolis, bus stop in Minneapolis, the food truck park in New Bohemia. His current concept is Hope Breakfast Bar, and he is in the process of reopening what used to be the Happy Gnome. It will just be the Gnome. Tanya Spalding is with Shea Design. She's a principal there. She helps restaurants and other retail outlets design their spaces. So that we'll turn it over to our panelists and let them kind of take over. What we want to do today is sort of talk about the trends we're seeing coming out of the pandemic here, some things that they see, some things that they are hearing or witnessing on their own, or design aspects that can or improve people's ability to have customers and clients into their spaces. So with that, I will turn it over to Pat and let her start the process.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. And Matt and I were talking after we had our initial conversation, and we decided to kind of stay out of the way a bit, because these 2 panelists really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the restaurant and retail industry, and have some very good insight and thoughts as we go forward. So we wanted to kind of start talking about the state or fate of the industry for both restaurants and retail, talking about what, kind of what the consumer is feeling, or to the best we can tell, kind of who's going to come out of this as a winner or loser, and what kind of business plan and focus that our panelists think that restaurant and retail owners should head for. So, Brian, why don't you start off?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with, the state of the climate out there right now. So we've been open for a few weeks here at Hope. We've had 2 of our best days we've ever had from before the pandemic or after. So we do think folks are coming out and wanting to get out of their houses again. What I would equate it to is 2 political parties. There's the people that believe in masks and want masks, and there's the people that don't want masks, don't want your staff in masks, and are very vocal about that. So it's definitely a 2-party situation that we're seeing, and that's the waters that are very difficult to walk in right now, are the folks that really want to social distance and really want to make sure that everybody is pertaining to wearing masks, whether it's at the table or walking to the bathroom. And then there's the folks that think enough is enough, and please take your staff out of masks and all of that stuff. So I guess that would be the state of the kind of union with the customers that we're seeing since reopening. And the other big thing that we've seen is online and through social media. Everybody really wants to know what we've done as a restaurant to make sure that our staff, 1, is safe, and then 2, the restaurants are safe. So for us, that was redesigning restaurants, building partitions that separate all the tables. That was trying to figure out the flow, because so much takeout and carry out business is being done. How do you tackle that? And just really making sure that everyone feels safe in whatever camp that they're in. So we've seen a lot of that, and really a lot of questions coming in on what we've done to be ready for them.
So, Tanya, what do you see in the retail and at the restaurant sector that you're involved in?
Well, like Brian said, there's a spectrum of fear across the country right now that we're dealing with, from the very, very conservative, barely leaving their home, to those that want to get out and be completely normal. And so what we're advising our clients to do across the country, because everyone's on a different opening schedule, is you really have to have the checklist and you have to meet all of the criteria. But we're doing, we're kind of going above and beyond and doing some branding versions of that. So the guidelines that Brian just mentioned, we're actually publishing those in kind of a fun branded way. Like, these are the things that we're doing to safeguard you. These are the things that we're doing to create a safe experience for you and your fellow guests. Putting the dots on the floor that a lot of people are ignoring, but at least you're checking the box to make sure that you're doing it. And mostly it is getting people back into a light, bright space. Don't make it look like you just shut the doors and turned off the lights 3 or 4 months ago. Make it look like you've spent your time cleaning it, maintaining it, really making it look like you've paid attention to every single detail in the space, bringing the light levels up a little bit, taking the extraordinary things that used to be part of the theater of the space and removing them for right now, physically removing the tables. And you don't have to go overboard, but just make sure that you're abiding by rules that make those that are a lot more conservative comfortable. We're also really promoting the idea of outdoor spaces as much as you can. Rent a tent, take over your old valet parking stalls, work with the city to get as much outdoor space as you can and put seats out there and try to give them some protection. But now's the time to get creative and be proactive.
So on the front end, as we go into this, who do you see so far besides the plexiglass industry that's kind of a winner coming out of this? And, aside from sit-down dining, casual restaurants, or white tablecloth, besides them, who else is suffering, do you think, during this period?
Well, I'll jump in on that. So I think, we went through almost the stages of grief from dating back from March until today. And a lot of restaurants, I think, took a couple of weeks to figure out, first and foremost, what am I going to do? At that point, there were certain segments of it that jumped right into the takeout, the take home, the curbside, and they rolled out a lot of different versions of it to try to perfect it. Those are the ones that, regardless if it's finer casual or finer dining or what category you fall in, those are the ones that set up a revenue stream that's going to be able to maintain itself even through this next phase. I think the ones at a disadvantage right now are the ones that didn't have the ability to do that, or didn't have the opportunity to do that, or chose not to. Because you're dealing with, bringing labor back in, dealing with bringing a customer base back in when you haven't been in operation. So you're almost starting from a ground up perspective. It's almost like opening a restaurant for the first time. So I think those that have generated those additional revenue streams, and are set up to maintain those, are going to have a little bit more of a fighting chance.
Brian, you're very plugged into the national restaurant community. What are you seeing out there as who's going to succeed coming out of this, and probably who's going to fail?
Yeah, what we're seeing nationally, I sit on a couple of the nation's restaurant news and a couple of the national boards, and what you're seeing are the restaurants that seem to be able to come back from this, or the folks like Tanya said were engaged throughout this process. So I think restaurants that their staff was engaged, their guests was engaged in whatever way that may have been, through social media, letting them know what steps they're doing to be ready to open. The folks that didn't do carryout or didn't have a patio before, that quickly pivoted to be able to make sure that their guests stayed in the habit of coming to their restaurants. They say it takes 30 days to create an effective habit. And I think you really need to, if your guest has created a new habit and now is dining somewhere else and going somewhere else, trying to get that guest to come back to you is a challenging thing. So I think that's what we're seeing nationally, is the folks that have stayed connected to their guests, that have been very vocal about what they're doing to make sure that their guests are safe, because so much of what we're doing is perception. Maybe a plexiglass divider or these wood partitions that you've done, it's an airborne kind of thing that's out there. So there's lots of conversations. How effective is it? Perception is everything right now. And if the guest looks around and sees you're doing every step, you're cleaning and sanitizing tables in between each use, that you've done the right thing with your menus, to your bathrooms, to having sanitizer readily available for your guests and staff. Perception, I think, is everything right now. So that's really what we're seeing nationally, is how do you make sure that your guests see what you're doing on a lot of things that you used to keep hidden. And then really kind of moving forward, what we're all talking about nationally is really the same things that happened after 9/11. All of the practices that we go through an airport now, they said those were only going to last 1 year, 2 years, and they were supposed to go away. Well, they never went away. And we think the dining in restaurants may fundamentally be changing. So everybody for the last few years has gone to these wide open spaces. Almost all of my restaurants were wide open spaces, communal seating. Any restaurant that I'm currently designing or getting ready to open, we quickly pivoted to make more individual spaces within the units. And that could be from high back booths that everybody went away from, to creating kind of individual pods within your restaurants. And I think that's what we're seeing nationally, as well as a lot of pivots to making more intimate spaces where before it was wide open spaces. There's a fundamental shift in that right now.
Brian, just as a kind of a extension to that question, what kind of innovations do you see going forward? In I know you've mentioned a few in your design work, but what other innovations do you see, and what other kinds of things that are your restaurants going to start employing to make the customer experience, feel that, like you said, perception is safe, that you're doing everything you can to keep them safe? What other kinds of things do you see kind of coming out of this pandemic that will help that perception, will continue to build on people's confidence that they're going to go out and be safe?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, again, more of the touch-free. Do the bathroom doors open touch-free? Can you do them with your foot, not touching handles? Having bathrooms that are touch-free, but not in the touch-free sense that we kind of were accustomed to. In the old days, maybe you had hand dryers that blow the air everywhere. Those were being told, you don't want that. So it's the handless, motionless towel dispensers that self kind of distribute, from soap dispensers to all of that kind of stuff. I think as much touch-free innovate. I think touch-free innovation is really going to be happening. Even us, all of our restaurants, we have moved to handhelds with guests and can really do things on their own without ever, if they didn't want to talk to a server, they could order food through apps. They're on their phone, so they're not touching anything that they don't want to touch, and they can maybe not have as much contact with the guests as we've always had in the past. So those are the waters that we're kind of, how is technology going to keep up with this new world, and how much of it do the guests want? There was a lot of pushback in the airports when they all went to these handheld devices. They wanted to talk to servers and talk to bartenders. So it's going to be an interesting world. How much do we stay hands-on and how much of it is hands-free? But for sure, the technology piece is going to become bigger and bigger. Apps are going to become bigger and bigger. And how you really navigate, not when you're sitting at the table, but when you're walking to a bathroom, when you're leaving bathrooms and lines at bathrooms. How do you control if you get backed up in the restrooms and all of that? So a lot of that stuff we're paying a lot of attention to. And really then the biggest other thing is, how do you bring takeout in and out of your world? In our old days, I would do 4 or 5 takeout orders a day. On Saturday, I think I did 470 takeout orders. How do you deal with that kind of traffic coming in and out of your space? How do you design your restaurants to make that more effective, where you can get to-goes in people's hands very, very quickly? They can pull up and pull right back out. So I think there's going to be a lot of that shifting as well.
So, Tanya, have your clients seen things that out of this that have changed design-wise that are actually beneficial? So they've had to pivot to make different design changes. What good innovations have come out of this?
Well, I think what we're going to see is a lot more. We're in the process, I think I counted, there's like 6 or 7 restaurants that we're removing seating and creating more of a fast casual market environment. Mm-hmm. So we're still keeping seating in there, but we're offering more shelf-stable products, more grocery, more grab-and-go, more takeout that the guest can control. So we're actually taking out parts of restaurants, or even in some cases, full concepts, repositioning that space to be more of a takeout market grocery. We just opened one in Wayzata that was set up perfectly for that. That is a great model. And I think we're going to see a lot of shift in focus to the guest control, the guest order, the guest grab and go, because as I mentioned, that spectrum of sphere is going to be around for a while. And just as many people that want to sit at a bar and get a drink, there are people on the opposite end of it that want to go in and buy and control their own environment. So I think the encouragement to look into how can you create more of a fast casual, a market experience, make money on this space, still offer the type of experience you want to offer. And as Brian said, I think the long-term shifts are going to be in sanitation overall. You're not going to any longer see bartenders and servers just wiping down tables. You're going to see actual disinfectant, sanitization. You're going to see more disposables, where we had these big, beautiful wine books in a finer casual environment, and linens in your bathroom and on your table. Going to more high quality disposables, I think is a shift that we'll see for quite a while as well. So I think some of those things, and then also creating, as Brian said, a really good environment for people to do takeout and take home. If you've got multiple entrances, if you have a door that can be repositioned with a window, being creative about that. Not that people won't want to come into your space, but the more you can make it easy for people to do takeout. And as I said, valet parking, can you convert those to curbside and delivery parking? Or curbside and takeout parking? I think making some of those shifts right now, as Brian said, I think it's going to be around for a while.
What about fine dining? What are they going to be able to do? Because there is still a benefit of, that dining experience, the gathering and so forth.
Well, I think fine dining, what we've all seen over the last, 5 to 8 years, it's become more approachable and more casual overall. Mm-hmm. So I think the connotation of fine dining takes on a lot of different meanings. I think it will return, but it's going to be in probably a smaller capacity, and it's going to be those that are in that category really making it even more approachable and adopting some of these things that I said. Maybe they don't go to a market experience, but you're seeing some great restaurants here in Minneapolis that are doing take and bake, and meal kits and very creative things that they could sell either directly or sell through other avenues like grocery stores and things like that. So I think even in the finer dining category, you still have to reach out and establish that connection, that approachability with yourself. I think the stuffiness of the high level of service is going to take a break for a little bit. But I think that's probably been going away for a while anyway. I mean, even like Demi in Minneapolis is a very approachable, what people would classify as a fine dining experience.
So switching to retail for a second, now how is retail, not necessarily the big boxes, but, along the regular retail, how are they having to adapt, for the pandemic and how long do you think that's going to have to be in place?
Well, I think first and foremost, the whole facet of retail of buy with your eyes and wander around a store, I think the shift is how do you sell your product online? How do you better sell and represent your SKUs and represent the uniqueness of your product online to allow people to perhaps do one of two things, either buy, perhaps peruse what your product and your inventory is online, even if they do come into the store at one point. So I think the challenge is how do you merchandise yourselves with more of a virtual experience? And then I think it is just better spacing. Some of the greatest retail stores that we've done have a lot of volume, have a lot of layers of things. I think we have to sort of take that back a little bit, maybe put more inventory in a back room and restock it a lot more frequently and not put as much product on the store. So it's a challenge from a visual merchandising standpoint, but it's going to make people feel more comfortable that they've got enough wiggle room to get in and out of your store and to look around.
And operationally, what kind of innovations have occurred that are you see as beneficial?
Yeah, well, I think. Oh, sorry, Tanya. Go ahead.
Oh no.
Todd.
Yeah, so for us, for innovation, I think restaurants as a whole and even retail, labor has always been the struggle. And how do you control labor? Wages are going up, minimum wage is going up, benefits are going up. So technology is helping. The one thing that has helped with all of this is technology. So if our servers are all using handhelds instead of 4 table sections, maybe they can have 8. We see it even with the clothing store Scout across the street from us. If people can order through their online app, and instead of having to have a huge store with a big footprint, I think you're going to see smaller footprints. People can order clothes through great apps, still show up and see some of the top sellers, but a lot of it's just done online and giving it when they pull up and bringing out clothes to them. We're seeing that a ton just in the little markets around us. So I think from an innovation and I guess the plus side of it is we've all been struggling with how do we change restaurants and fundamentally get labor down. In the old days, we would run 20%, 30% all in labor, and it's been pushing 40% across the industry now with all of the spikes that we've seen in labor performance. So I think that's the one positive that's coming online.
Let me jump in real quick because for CE compliance reasons, I have to ask a question, but this one's going to be fruitful and enjoyable. So everybody that's getting CE, go to your chat room and get ready to answer a question. Today's first question is, what trends are you seeing? What changes are you seeing in the restaurant industry, assuming that you've been out to eat at least once, to maybe spark some ideas? I'm assuming Tanya and Brian don't have a corner in the market, probably know just about everything, but put your stuff out there. And there's a question from Matt and Pat. So give us some good answers. Appreciate it. If you don't have an answer, just write, I don't know or something. But we need to answer the question to get CE credit. Thanks, everybody.
Another quick question. In addition, I mean, I know we talked a little bit about design, and it seems like the focus has been, certainly on the inside space because that's where the concern lies. Shifting your focus to the outside space and design kind of innovations and things you're seeing, what types of things do you think are going to come out of this pandemic in terms of designing outdoor space, whether it's more grab-and-go spaces for parking, whether it's a bigger patio, what kind of innovations do you see sort of spilling out of the pandemic here in terms of outdoor spaces? And either Brian or Tanya can jump in and answer that.
Well, I think the expansion of outdoor spaces and people restaurants that haven't had patios in the past or haven't really had the opportunity for patios. I'm desperately hoping what comes out of this is cities and municipalities are going to be a lot more easy to work with in using outdoor space, expanding of outdoor spaces, and it's really important to in climates. In 50% of our country, everyone loves being outside, and now more than ever, half the year. So, and how do you convert those outdoor spaces in the fringe season? So, how can you put in fans? How can you put in, maybe some wind protection in the tents that you're doing in outdoor spaces? How can you actually convert those so they're comfortable, not for 3 months out of the year, but for 5 or 6 months out of the year? I also think the indoor outdoor, the ability to open. We've been doing a lot of garage door type of bars and seats, and we worked with Brian on the one in St. Paul actually, where you open the garage door and you've got an indoor outdoor bar. I think those indoor outdoor experiences, I think we're going to see people looking for more and more opportunities to really make that connection more directly.
How do you think that indoor outdoor space for purposes of the 50% or the counts is, if you have the garage door open, does that change to the outdoor calculations? Is that considered still indoor, or how do you count those spaces? Is this for purposes of making sure you're in compliance?
Yeah, I can jump in on this. I actually just with the health department yesterday on this. So what the recommendations and everything that's being said to us is, if you can't maintain 6 feet of space, you have to have a mask. So that 50% calculation is still in effect, patio or not patio. But several dining rooms are considered patios. So if you look at some of the concepts that I've had, New Bohemia, Truck Park, all of those, the dining rooms by the health department and even by the building, we had to have sealed kitchens, and the dining rooms were considered patio seating. So where that helped was when it was patio only seating. So if there's a flare up again and they go back to just patio only, if your restaurant is set up by code and it's considered, because of the amount of garage doors you have, to be the inside of your dining room is considered a patio. So I think like Tanya said, you'll see a lot more restaurants that are going to that model. And again, I think a lot of it is guest perception. If they feel like fresh air is coming in into the space, it makes them feel more comfortable. What
are you planning on doing in the fall, in the winter? Have you thought that far ahead?
Yeah, for us, we're just bringing outside in, just kind of what Tanya said. So we have green walls in every one of our restaurants that we're doing right now. The lighter, the brighter colors. So yeah, our capacity is going to shrink dramatically. And I think this winter is going to really be an interesting winter. If we go into the winter, all of us lose our patios and we're running at 50% occupancy only, there's gonna be some losses there's gonna be a lot of restaurants that don't make it through that because you can't take 50% of your restaurant unless you get super inventive, like Tanya said, do things better than anybody. And hopefully the grocery store wants to buy for us. They want to buy your pancake mixes, your syrups, and you're going to have to start thinking about how do you offset that revenue with take home and hopefully getting it in a retail setting. So I think you'll see a lot of restaurants trying to pivot that. And I think grocery stores, we've had Lunds and Barley's and Kowalski's all reaching out to us because I think they're trying to fill that niche as well. Mm-hmm. So I think you'll start seeing a lot of restaurants pivoting and selling their goods within a retail setting.
Tanya, have you had any forethought as to when the weather in Minneapolis, when the weather turns, what can we do to try to maximize the seating?
Well, and the guess is from everyone is when, as Brian said, that 50%, when will that, there is no marker out there for any changes in that right now. So that's where, as I mentioned, with tents and heaters, and we're actually working right now to try to figure out how to make some of these spaces, how to make them a little bit more comfortable to get us through, maybe it's September and October at least. It's kind of putting these little steps out there. It's like, okay, so now we did everything we could to get open again. At whatever capacity we're open, however we're open. Now we're setting our sights on how do we run that 50%? How do we get creative on additional revenue streams to keep us afloat? And now we're focusing in on the fall. So that's our next step. So when the weather starts to turn across the country, how do we actually create outdoor spaces that can convert? Throughout some of our projects in the East Coast for Hershey, we are literally buying tents that are almost superstructure that increase the seating by almost 100%, and then it changes that 50% model. It's trickier for labor and operations because how many people do you have? It's more spread apart. How do you keep your eyes on people? So that's the next set of challenges that we're doing right now. So, and I think tent manufacturers are probably doing really well.
Yeah. So that's kind of focusing on the spacing to provide more space so that you can have a higher occupancy. Is that what that addresses?
Yeah, it is. And the cities right now that we're working with are being flexible in doing that. But everyone is viewing this as temporary. So in the long term, you can't just change your occupancy for 100% because you've got restroom counts and things like that. So you still have to stay within. We're all trying to figure out what are the occupancy, what are the temporary codes that we have to abide by. If we do expand, how do we do that? So those are definitely the challenges we're working through right now because it's anyone's guess when things will change past that 50%.
And how have you seen your clients, retail and restaurant, change their business plan going forward?
Well, from our perspective, we're working with quite a few of them on that right now. And unfortunately, can you run your business plan at 50% of what you were doing? And we were coming off of a couple of really good years for restaurants. Some of them had record years. And to take that and to cut it in half and to figure out what you can maintain, what your labor, what your operations looks like, what your revenue looks like. And I think we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. How can you work with your landlord to bring your fixed costs in line to make that work? It's rewriting a business plan for the most part.
And Brian, do you have any thoughts on that as far as what you're planning, or are you just going to have to see what comes as you go forward?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. So we have lots of projects that we're in the middle of negotiating, and then we do a lot of consulting, helping other restaurants and food halls, and that what Tanya was kind of talking about, those fixed costs and cams and all of that. If you're in a giant food hall, use Keg and Case for instance, right now. Now they're having to hire more staff to clean and sanitize to get ready to reopen. So their costs are actually going up for their kind of fixed expenses because they have to have people monitoring doors to let people in. They have to have all of that. So I think as this new world is going, it'll be an interesting how this all shakes out because we're all asking, put us on percentage rent only for the next 5 years. So all the tenants are going, switch us over to percentage rent because we don't know what the new world is. Landlords, every landlord that I've talked to, even us on the stuff that we have, nobody's given us a break on paying any of those banknotes or any of that stuff. So all of us that are leasing space, we're asking for percentage only rent. Well, the lenders aren't saying, hey, we're going to cut your mortgage in half to get you through the next 5 years. So I think there's going to be some more legislation and some more stuff that's going to be coming out that, I think those are going to be the difficult waters to navigate as people are negotiating leases right now. We're in the middle of negotiating 2 leases right now. And both of them are percentage rent only deals for 5 years. And then it switches to a fixed kind of flat rate after that. So I think that'll be the interesting kind of movement going forward. As far as getting ready for it, what we're seeing in all of our restaurants is a huge push to be ready to sell take-home meals, a huge push to maximize our space. If it's an enclosed patio, adding heaters, all of that. I think we're all, we know we can't be outside all year, but like Tanya said, if we can make it through October, maybe a bit of November, and open earlier on the flip side, with more space, and just hunkering down for 3 to 4 months as opposed to 6 months of the year.
Yeah. So the landlord and tenant issues, Tanya, and you both mentioned, Matt and I have been dealing a fair amount with both on the landlord and the tenant side. And when all this started, there were tenants, large tenants that just sent notes to their landlords saying, we're not paying rent. We're not paying rent for 3 months, or you get landlords who have sent notices and say, we're not willing to work with you at all. So there's kind of a spectrum of the concessions that landlords have made. It runs from a reduced rent that then gets amortized over a period of time, starting next year. No rent and abatement of rent for 3 months, and then you add term to the end of the lease so that the landlord's still getting some rent. But Brian, to your point, the landlords have mortgages, and then the CAM and the taxes. The taxes aren't changing, so it's the landlords and tenants so far, I think, have been working together. But a lot of what we did initially was the 3 month, okay, give us a break for 90 days till we figure this out, and then we'll start up again. Well, that 90 days is running out pretty quickly. So I don't know, Matt, what is your experience?
It's very similar to that. I mean, I think some of the other things that we're seeing is landlords and tenants, realizing the situation is sort of better if they're trying to work together. So we're encouraging it where there's a good relationship there. Obviously, if there's been some tension in the relationship, it makes it more difficult to get some concessions either from the tenant side or from the landlord side, mostly from the landlord side. So it really boils down to the relationship that I think the tenant and landlord have, or the tenant and the landlord's rep have. But some of the other things I think are, that I think we can be creative in addition to looking at, sort of percentage rent seems to be one of the things that people are asking for, or deferral or some deferment of rent. Obviously adding 3 months or 90 days to the back end of the lease are some of the solutions. Tanya or Brian, what other types of creative solutions are you seeing from the tenant and landlord sides that can help kind of each other? Obviously if there's a good relationship there, you want it to continue going forward. So what other creative solutions are you seeing or are you hearing about where the landlord and tenants are trying to work together to better the situation for both?
Well, we've seen all sides. So when this all started in March, we counseled a lot of our clients to reach out to your landlord or through the rep that you have. And the large chains and the large companies may have the capacity to send threatening letters and say, I'm not paying rent. I think the approach for most in this market and most of our clients is, hey, this whole situation is affecting everyone. So reach out to them and start the conversation. And we've seen all kinds of, the percentage rent, it makes the most sense because it does not put a time frame on it. As Brian said, we don't know how long this is going to last. 90 days may not help in the long run. So can you actually, you've got 2 years left on your lease. We've seen some renegotiate the lease completely. So they signed a 5-year lease, which extends at 3 years, but they went to a percentage situation for the next 2 years. So that's how it's getting creative. Even if your lease isn't up, is it close enough that you can renegotiate it? Maybe extend it a little bit and maybe get different terms. That's certainly the most ideal for some of the restaurateur clients. I think the easiest answer is, as Brian said, the straight percentage rent right now, because it's the only thing that gives restaurateurs a little bit of control. Otherwise, they've got this hanging over their head that, okay, now in 90 days I have to deal with this again, and what do I do then? And if I extend it to the end of my lease, I'm just owing more money in the long run. And that makes the long-term business a lot less viable for some restaurateurs.
Right. And then what about CAM and taxes? Brian, when you're renegotiating, are you having to pay the CAM and taxes for some of
Yeah,
the,
that's the really difficult one. It's one thing to renegotiate your base rent, but camp taxes, like you said, the taxes aren't changing, so it's really tough for the landlord to say, "Hey, I'm going to give you a break on it." And what we're seeing again on a lot of their CAM expenses on common areas, they're having to spend a lot more to maintain common areas and to make sure that their capacities are being followed, and putting people, if you're in a hotel property or a market property or a big box, you've got to control the amount of people that are coming in. So we haven't seen a ton of movement on CAM, but what most of the landlords that I've negotiated with for us personally are helping other people with these waters. It's a percentage rent. That's CAM, that's rent, that's everything. For the small businesses, their option is I either shut down my doors or you give me this relief and go back and try to figure it out with your lender, because they really don't have a choice. They're going to go out of business. I've been consulting with a bunch of friends that are one-off restaurants. Most of them are in the Latino community and have small kind of family-owned Mexican restaurants. And what we've seen is if they didn't have a relationship with their landlord before, that relationship's got very tumultuous now. I have a few of them that have already been put on a notice that they're going to be going away, that the landlord's not willing to work with them. So I think that's going to be the challenge. And I think it's just super important to build relationships right now and have those relationships. So like Tanya said, like getting their clients to reach out and talk to your landlord. If you haven't been in contact with somebody, with your landlords, and really trying to work with them and being empathetic to them, saying, hey, I know you've got to work through this, but we've got no choice. We're either going to shut down, and there's not probably a lot of restaurateurs that are out there growing in the middle of this, other than me, that's probably not the smartest guy in the group. So I think it's in the landlords. You don't want somebody to walk away and now you're trying to fill that space. I'm getting hundreds of emails a week saying, here's a built out space for you at literally no cost and a year's free rent and X and X. So I think it's going to get more and more challenging. So I think landlords, it's going to be better to keep the folks you have in the building instead of trying to go out and find somebody new.
so Matt, I know when this started, we spent a lot of time going through leases and seeing if there's a force majeure clause. In most cases, it doesn't excuse the payment of rent. You can probably have a good argument if you have an continuous occupancy clause because of the pandemic. But as these leases start to be put in default and so forth, do you have any thoughts about whether there's, if there will be some kind of a force majeure argument, and if there's much of a chance of that prevailing, or what other arguments might a tenant make?
I think, the force majeure clause is certainly an argument you can make. I don't know how successful it will be going forward, just because of some of the things you cited. Also, it seems to be outside of what that clause was intended to be, in my opinion. Some of the things I think you might start seeing is clauses in there that discuss pandemics specifically, or in some cases discuss the idea of, if the civil authority, be it state, city, whatever, shuts down your ability to operate, does that excuse rent? I don't know how successful those will be, because clearly the landlords aren't going to want that. But I think you're going to start seeing clauses that could sort of morph into things that protect tenants from the exact situations we've been talking about here. I don't know how likely you are to get that passed through a landlord. I don't know how difficult that will be if you're from a landlord, because we represent both landlords and tenants here at our firm. I can see a scenario where a tenant might want it, where a landlord is going to completely say no. So those are the kind of things that I think we're going to start seeing. I think there's at least going to be a discussion about it, whether it actually exists as a clause in the lease going forward, or an amendment to a lease going forward. I guess will remain to be seen. Some of the other things we're seeing are, claims that are being made under various types of insurance. For example, business interruption insurance. I think it's a difficult argument to make. There are some novel cases out there that are sort of trying a new tact here. The Thomas Keller case in California comes to mind. But that's going to be, I think, some avenues that people are going to try. There's also civil authority insurance where that's going to be a potential claim. There's some ideas, about how that's going to be reflected going forward and helping these businesses recoup some of the losses they've sustained. The other thing that I think, that we might start seeing with regard to some of the other claims that are going to be made out there are going to be, I think, with the COVID situation and businesses opening back up, I think we're going to see an uptick, at least a little bit, in workers' compensation claims if there's sick workers or there's a cluster of sick workers, things like that. Some businesses have discussed, I don't think it's discussed waivers. I don't think that's, some businesses have decided they want to do that. We've had a couple of clients approach us about that. I think from our perspective, waivers
Waivers for the employees?
Waivers for their employees. Yeah, sorry. Waivers for their employees. I don't think, at least from our initial analysis based on the industries that we were reviewing that in, I don't think it's recommended. There might be some in other industries that it would be. To me, it would be a case-by-case analysis. If you need, if somebody needs review of that, I think it would be based on the facts of your particular situation and your business and how your employees interact, et cetera. We have seen waivers from businesses that provide customer service. Say things that come to mind are HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning businesses, where they go into your home. They're asking for customers to sign waivers for that. That makes a little bit more sense in terms of that business. But those are some of the trends that we're seeing outside of some of the issues that we've talked about. As far as employment things going forward here, I think, Brian, you've touched on it. Tanya, you've touched on it a little bit. What are some of the other things you're seeing from an employee relation perspective related to your businesses or your clients' businesses? Either Tanya or Brian can jump in and answer.
Sure. So for us, I think the biggest thing was when we first started the process of reopening, we sent an email out to all of our staff. Probably less than 10% of them at first were wanting to come back. And then the same thing we had to do with our guests and show them how we were going to protect them. We had to show our staff how we would protect them. So we invited them in to take a tour and see all the different things that we've done within the restaurant to make it safe for them as well as the guests. So after that first week, about 50% said they wanted to come back. And then a lot of them is there money to be made for them? That most of our staff are making about $1,000 a week on unemployment. And when it was patio only, nobody wanted to come back because it was so weather. If you're a server, if it rains outside, now you come in and you make no money. And if you were on unemployment, you were going to make X. So I think people are just scared and the unknown. So the more we can do to reassure them and help them to see how this new world is going to be as we move forward is just so important. So I think showing your staff that you care, showing them that they matter, not strong arming them. I've talked to lots of restaurants. I'm denying their unemployment claim because I sent them a letter and they don't want to come back to work. One, it's going to blow up on social media. You don't want to be that business. So I think, again, it's all about relationships, and it's how do you treat people with respect, and this is uncharted territory. So I think that's the biggest thing is how do you kind of engage your staff and get them into your businesses to say, we need you to be safe. Frankly, if we have a foodborne illness outbreak, our restaurant goes away. If we were ground zero for COVID, our restaurant, chances are our guests aren't going to feel safe and want to come back. So I think really just working with your staff and following best practices to stay safe, that's going to be everything in this new world.
Tanya, how are you seeing your retail clients restaffing now? Has it been a challenge for them?
Yes, I would echo what Brian said. There was a lot of reluctance because they were making a lot more money and because they know most employers are not going to flag it and say they are not eligible because they refuse to come back. I think from the restaurant side of things, what we're working with a lot of clients on is maybe consumers don't love this, but putting in a fixed tip. So we're seeing a lot more businesses convert to either 18 to 20%, not the 3% health and wellness, but an actual tip, going to a little bit more of a European model, whether it's spoken or unspoken, but actually saying, you know what, we are going to add the tip onto your check. So that safeguards a little bit of the employee. It shows the employees that you as a restaurateur are looking out for them to try to continue to at least keep that tipping revenue stream. And the other thing that that Brian brings up is the what if someone gets COVID? So how our restaurants respond to that, because the reality is, I mean, it's like the flu. People are going to continue to get it for some time, and you can't close down your business every time that happens. So what do you do? I think first and foremost, what a lot of restaurants are doing around the country is they're paying to get all of their employees tested immediately. And those of which they're doing the tracing and putting in quarantine, and then just continuing all the safety measures. But that's going to be a very real factor for a lot of operators right now, because chances are probably pretty good that someone on your staff will get it, or that a guest that came in will contact you and say, hey, I had it and I didn't know it. And to be able to react to that and guarantee that your business is not going to close down for an indefinite amount of time again, because now that we're up and running, we can't afford that. Most businesses can't afford that.
So Matt, what is the rule on it? So if you're offered a job, so Brian opens and he sends email out to his employees that, hey, you're eligible. What happens if they decide not to? Not from a business and a PR standpoint, but legally, what are the options?
Well, I mean, there is Brian sort of hit the nail on the head. He's like, there's an option where the employer said, hey, I requested, came back, and they said no. And they're claiming unemployment, so I'm going to go in and deny their unemployment. You can certainly do that. To Brian's point, I don't know that it's not going to help your cause much. But I think that, I think a lot of business, at least a lot of clients that we've been talking to, are taking a more cautious approach. I mean, they're offering their position back to their employee if they don't want it, because they have and even if it's not legitimate, but they're viewing it as a legitimate fear of COVID, either because they have an underlying condition or because of whatever their reason is. I think most businesses that we've been consulting with, we've said, it's better to be cautious. That way, you're not forcing somebody to do something. You're not, and the danger there, of course, is that you could potentially affect your morale at your business because you're forcing somebody to come in rather than letting them make their own choice. But in some instances, I don't know that it really boils down again to what your business is. Some businesses have the luxury of being able to kind of plug and play employees. Other businesses don't. So it really boils down to how your business is structured, how your employees are, what employee it is. And I think you really need to make that on a case-by-case basis. So from my perspective, I think if you've got that situation, it's better to consult with somebody who can help you walk through the pros and cons of strong arming versus not strong arming, and really take it on a case-by-case basis. Because I think, again, to Brian's point, is you run the risk of really destroying either your reputation or ruining your employee morale very quickly. So it's
Todd?
Yeah. I'm just listening intently, waiting for you to get to that. I got to ask one more question. Sorry for everybody that's getting CE. Real quick, this is a selfish question. 3 answers again. Yes, maybe, no. The question is, Minnesota Real Estate Journal, we are trying to plan live events. We were going to try late July, now maybe early August, but I want to know if you're in the audience, and even if you're not getting CE, chime in on this one. Are you ready to come to a live event? There will be some social distancing. Just like the restaurant industry, it's completely across the board how many people a venue say they can fit in their venue. We'll pick the one that we can put the most people comfortably in. So if you're ready to get together, go in the chat room, say yes. If you're not, say no, and the maybes maybe. And thank you. You guys, it's 10:54. Feel free to keep talking. I will come back at the end, and there's a couple questions I flagged. Let you know, but take your time.
I don't know if Brian or Tanya, if you have any additional remarks you want to make. Otherwise, we can certainly open it up to questions at this point. But if there's questions that we didn't ask that you would like to answer, feel free to jump in here. Or if the audience wants to ask questions of anybody on the webinar, feel free to do that as well. I
can give you a couple that were asked earlier. Percentage rent, I assume that's what this is about, is what are the typical percentage you're seeing? And they suggested 7% or 10%. What are the if you're switching from a fixed to a percentage, where's that market at?
Well, I
Everything.
recommend.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tanya.
No, you go. You go. You go.
Everything I'm seeing is 7 to 10. And most of them are with CAM and everything included are 10%.
Tanya,
Yeah.
yeah.
I would say the same thing. We have a lot of restaurateurs that are kind of coming in a little lower than that, but I think when you factor in the CAM and taxes, it's I think if you get 7%, that's a pretty attractive deal.
And then there's another question here from J. Todd Adams. I don't really understand it. Maybe you all do. Is there a trend of putting an operating or management agreement in place versus having a traditional lease?
Actually, that is what we're probably going to see as a next step. So as these vacancies increase, especially for landlords that have spaces or a lot of real estate and they've got retail as part of that or restaurants as part of that, I think in the next phase of what we see as restaurants close and as some of those retail environments close, I think reaching out to operators and offering an operating agreement rather than a lease is going to be a lot more attractive to get someone into that space. So we're not seeing it in renegotiating right now, but we are actually going to, I think it's a very creative way for landlords to fill some of these spaces that are going to be tough to get someone to sign a 5 or 10-year lease.
And maybe this is a good point to kind of explain what the difference is between a lease and an operating agreement. And I won't, I'll let the, if you want to answer it, Tanya, or if you want to answer it, Brian, that's fine. Otherwise, we certainly can, but I don't want to step on your toes either.
Yeah, I think just
Go ahead.
easily, you don't, in a management agreement or an operating agreement, you don't have any real estate rights. It's a personal contract. And so, the danger is that in a lease, you're going to be able to get, there's a predictable long-term income. And then if the tenant defaults, then you have a way to recover your damages. In a management agreement, we generally don't see that as a remedy. So it's it's riskier for the landlord. But for the tenant, it's helpful. But again, it goes on the personal contract basis as far as how long and what the requirements are there minimum requirements? And Matt,
What the remedies are if you default
Right.
under an operating
Right.
agreement versus a lease? They're very different. They can be very different. They can look similar, operate similarly. But yeah, just in case there are people in the audience that don't understand the difference, and certainly don't want to assume that everybody knows, but we also don't want to insult anybody who's intelligent.
Yeah.
So
so Tanya, from a practical standpoint, what are you seeing as kind of some of the differences and the advantages?
Well, it is, you're absolutely right. It is a lot less attractive for a landlord, but what we're going to see is a lot of vacancies. So, and a lot of reluctance. There's, with restaurateurs, they're entrepreneurial in spirit. So they will continue to grow and people will continue to go into the restaurant industry. But I have to say, for the next year or two, there's going to be a lot of reluctance of signing on to a 5 to 10 year lease agreement.
Right.
So I think landlords are going to have to unfortunately, put a lot more of their own risk out there if they want the space activated. So I think, they have to make it attractive, especially for a restaurateur. If they've got a restaurant space, let's say it's in a building, if it's an amenity for tenants, however you're looking at it, and it's sitting there vacant, and there's no real great way to repurpose it other than keeping it as a restaurant. I think it's riskier for landlords, but it's a way to fill the space if you need to.
So lenders are going to have to become more flexible.
Yeah.
To understand what is acceptable income to back up the loan.
Exactly.
I think you're going to see, we probably took 10 phone calls last week asking us to do pop-ups, and we've got a space. Somebody spent $3 million, $4 million, whatever the number was, building it out. They've already taken it back. Every plate, every glassware, everything is in the space because the landlord was in position one. And they're asking, will you do a 1-year management agreement? You'll operate it, open it as a pop-up. Pop-ups were all the rave before the pandemic. And I think you're going to see this multiply. Like Tanya said, it's happening right now where everybody's wanting to do 1 to 3 year agreements as a management agreement. And for a restaurateur, I mean, the upside of it is you're not coming out of pocket a ton of money like we were in the old days. You're coming out, maybe you put a little paint on it and put a new sign on the building. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of this in the coming years.
Were there any more questions, Todd, or?
Yeah, there was one more, and I got to find where I put it. I do want to, while I'm looking for that, I want to answer everybody online. There was one person who said no, they wanted to do online events till 2021, and we solved a really cool problem. Went to Golden Valley Country Club. Alan and I were there 3 times. We figured out how to run a live event through Webinar Jam and also bring in an outside speaker from their house, and everybody can watch it online. So we could bring in Brian from South Dakota when he's visiting his son, and he could be in that room on the screen with us, and we could still project it out. So online's going to be a real option. I know that everybody wants to get together, though, so I got to say that. This is kind of an observation, but a question. Joan Grutwasink, this situation is tough for tenants, but also tough for landlords. Their costs are still there. How do they survive? So maybe it's a Brian question. How do you get through this?
Yeah, I think legislation is going to have to come. There's going to have to be some stuff that comes out of this because, listen, I'm a tenant as well as a landlord. So it's so tough right now. The tenants can't survive and neither can the landlords. So there's going to have to be some breaking point that's going to happen where, like even with all these management agreements that are getting out there, almost all of those are percentage rent deals, and maybe it works great for the landlord and they make more money, or maybe they lose money on it. So I think I don't think there's any simple answer for it, and I think we're just getting to the kind of crucible of it. It's really gonna. I think our world on that front is going to change a lot in the next 90 to 100 days. Yeah.
Right, and I think even the new legislation on the PPP loans allows for more of that to be applied to rent. So I think there is an ongoing recognition of that.
Yeah, where the original PPP was more focused on obviously stabilizing employment and stabilizing companies' cash flow, I think you're going to start seeing a little bit more nuance where people realizing that, in addition to doing that, we need to stabilize, the whole tenant-landlord relationship, or keep spaces that are operating, or encourage spaces to continue operating, so people actually have jobs and keeping that market stabilized.
And I know ICSC is lobbying to provide some mortgage relief for landlords and to try to protect that industry, especially as there are a lot of mortgagors that, large mortgagors that back, large malls such as, the one down the street from us.
Yeah. And I think you're going to see, I think with banks, with 2007, 2008 in the back of their mind, they're going to be a little bit more flexible and trying to come up with creative solutions too. There hasn't been this very stark outcry from that industry saying, no, we're not going to do that. I think you're seeing that they're going to be like, hey, we're taking a wait and watch mode here, but we really want to make sure that we're part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think that's where these varying groups are going to come together and hopefully come up with some really good solutions to avoid this being a crisis. I think they're going to come up with some really good solutions, hopefully, that will work for both landlords and tenants and everybody else involved. So
I think we're good to wrap it up. I don't see any more questions. I'm proud of all of you who've been on our CE events. By the way, they even put their name and number in when they're done. Belt and suspenders, because Katie's a human being trying to check lots of boxes, so it's good to help her out. Thank you all very much. Matt and Pat and Tanya and Brian, do you want to say some final words? And I'll disappear. I'm going to throw up some slides and we'll call this a wrap. So final to you. And
Brian, why don't you lead us off?
For me, it's just if you have the means and the ways, I know it's a tough world out there for everybody, get out and support all your local restaurants and do whatever you can to help support them and their staff. That's really it. And again, thanks for having us. Thanks for letting us talk and spend some time with you.
Yeah, and I agree with Brian. Get out there. I've personally, ever since Outdoor Dining opened, been out to eat every night I've been in Minneapolis. So people are taking it seriously. They're being very safe. The operators are being very responsible. And let's support our community and let's hopefully help everyone get back on track. And thank you.
Yep.
And we concur with that. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time this morning.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.